You might recall that early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of news coming out about how COVID was starting to spread like wildfire inside of a number of different prison systems. And we would talk about it, and thankfully there was some good journalism, but not a lot of people really seemed to care, which I mostly chalk that up to two things. One is that we've been trained as Americans to believe that prisoners deserve no consideration, no rights, no empathy, no anything. And the second is everyone was legitimately fair about COVID, outside of prisons as well. Well, it's been a long time since those early days, and we basically got the outcome that one would expect. We didn't take it seriously. We didn't do much testing. We didn't really help these people. And so it turns out that prisoners have massively suffered from COVID, with 1 in every 5 state and federal prisoners in the US apparently testing positive for coronavirus during this first year. That's a rate more than 4 times as high as the general population. In some states, more than half of prisoners have been affected. And this is according to data collected by the Marshall Project. So we're gonna be delving into the results of this Marshall Project work, but it is all freely available. You can take a look at it, and you can especially get information for your individual state and see how many people got sick, how many died, what the infection rate looks like compared to the general population. But the numbers overall are incredibly high. 275,000 prisoners being infected. And by the way, that's infections that have been found. We don't really test, so God only knows what the actual number is. But at least 1,700 prisoners have died of COVID, and that is still ongoing. We're in the beginning of this dark winter. The dark winter exists inside of the prisons as well. I have a little bit more information on this, but what's your initial reaction?
I'm just, I'm taken aback by that, not because of the reality of America. The reality of America is that we dehumanize anyone that's not easily capitalized on, right? And prisoners are capitalized on, but we dehumanize them to the point where we don't even know this at scale. Americans need to know, this needs to be saturated across the country, that 1 in 5 prisoners have contracted coronavirus and 1,700 have died. And I wonder, I have to pause and think and wonder, would America even care? Because we had 300,000 people die, including those 750. So I think maybe it's the part that we're just so desensitized to this entire event that it just won't even move the dial, but it really, really should.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of how, people who are institutionalized in any way, people who are elderly and put in long-term care facilities, institutionalized in that way, people institutionalized in prisons, people institutionalized to care for their mental health. That's a complete abnegation of us trying to solve a problem. We just decide to hide the problem. And COVID takes hold in those places where we shove people who are trying to hide because we don't want to fix any problems. It's unbelievably sad, and the COVID crisis is so huge that my brain can't even wrap around it. To imagine 1 in 5 prisoners having coronavirus, and to also know that we don't know the long-term impacts of COVID. We don't know how these people are going to cope with the after effects of having COVID for months or for years or for the rest of their lives. It seems like irresponsible state sponsored like torture almost. And I don't believe that enough people are gonna care about this to change it, but it's just such a shame. And it really is one of those pieces of information from this whole pandemic that has stuck out to me as something that I can't wrap my head around. It's so massive and it's so horrible.
Yeah, and in particular, like it's really this story of most of 2020 and especially the pandemic is it was always gonna be bad. It didn't have to be terrible. We knew everything we needed to know. We had all of the resources necessary to stop it. And the journalism was making clear in the very early stages what was going to happen inside and outside of prisons, either inside the prison or the country at large. And we mostly made the decision, we're just not gonna do that stuff. We sort of pretended to for a couple of weeks in America, but for the prisoners, no. I mean, maybe there are countries where most people have empathy for those who've been locked up, but America certainly isn't it. And so people didn't care. I remember at the beginning of this year, it was a story that this is before the pandemic, has nothing to do with the pandemic. At one point, one of the scandals for Bernie Sanders was that he said, I believe during a town hall, that we should be allowing prisoners to vote. and he was attacked by like everyone. Because how dare you imply that these people who are affected by the decisions of politicians, by legislation that is passed, should ever have any of the rights that there's nothing in the Constitution that says they shouldn't have those rights. We've just decided that they're not going to. And if you want to give them those rights, there are some states that have done that. You can try to pass that and you will be demonized as a person who cares more about prisoners than anyone else, even though it's not letting them out of prison. It's literally just letting them cast a vote, one vote out of millions in these elections. But that is the limit of our compassion, that we won't even allow them to exercise rights that are sort of like largely symbolic.
Yeah, that's indicative of a broader problem of American individualism. We haven't been groomed or raised or indoctrinated to care about other people. We have been indoctrinated to only care about ourselves and our own personal bottom line. Everybody wants to build their empire. Everybody wants to be rich and all these things. And so when it came time for us to have just a modicum of collective spirit, we completely just said, no, it's okay. We'll handle the 300,000 deaths. And it did not help that we had an administration that completely inflamed that type of thinking and did not do anything to counteract it.
And baked into this lack of empathy or care for people who are imprisoned is this weird assumption that everyone's there for a reason that is justified. And the reality is there's so many people that are in prison that are getting COVID that shouldn't be there. Either they were wrongfully convicted, either they were given an unbelievably harsh sentence for a crime that didn't warrant it. There are so many people in prisons. Like, most people are not Timothy McVeigh in prison. You know what I mean? Most people are kind of in a gray area where it's like, do we really need to have these people locked up? Are they a danger to society? And it just really, it could happen to anybody to get locked up for a reason that, and seriously, you could get locked up for something that you didn't do. It happens every single day. And some of the people that are suffering as a result of this are not even supposed to be in prison.
Yeah, and look, I'm just gonna put it out there. I mean, this is a country that still sort of like uniquely among countries like ours in terms of, income and stuff like that, still has the death penalty. And we have at least one party and a little bit of the other party that is perfectly fine with it and would probably like to see it used in more cases than it is. Is there any chance that some of them found this to be sort of two birds, one stone to ignore its spread? That honestly, it's gonna go through and it's gonna take out people that they have literally no empathy for in the best of cases. I mean, this is an administration that we're finding out this week through the memos confirmed what we already knew, which was they wanted as many people to get infected with this as possible. Like, do we really think that they had special empathy for prisoners? I don't.
No.
In any event, as of right now, we should expect that the future is gonna be even worse, because just like in the country at large, new cases in prisons this week reached their highest level since testing began in the spring, much higher than in the previous peaks. And former chief medical officer at New York's Rikers Island jail complex says that the number that we're seeing in prisons is a vast undercount because they're not testing nearly anyone. They don't test them, they don't really offer care. And so people are dying at higher rates inside of prisons when they could be saved. They're getting far sicker than they needed to. Even if they survive, they might be far greater affected by COVID because they're not treated in the same way. And like, I'm gonna throw this out here. Maybe for conservatives, maybe this will get through to you. So you know what you have in prisons? You have prisoners. You also have prison guards, and they interact with prisoners and they get sick. In North Dakota, 4 of every 5 prison staff have gotten coronavirus. Nationwide, it's 1 in 5, which is the same rate as prisoners, because the air is the same in there. And by the way, they then go out into the community. They bring COVID into the prison. It didn't just spontaneously evolve inside of a prison, and then it goes back out. So if you help these people test, quarantine, vaccinate, then that's also gonna help all of the communities that have prisons. And this is America, so that's basically every community.
Yeah, I mean, and in addition to people who work as guards, there are people, my brother's a public defender. So he is in jails and prisons all the time. There are people that teach in prisons. There are people that volunteer in prisons. There are, people that work to provide education to prisoners. And those people are at risk too, and their families are at risk, and everybody that they are around is at risk. And you have a lawyer that's working with a bunch of different prisoners going from client to client to client to client. That's also a potential spreading event. It's so much bigger than just the people who are actually in prison. That's a really good point.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.